Hi, my name is Jack Amendolia, and I work for a firm called Watson and Associates. We were hired to help the board with the school boundary review that they're conducting for all their schools in the city of Oshawa. There are a lot of schools involved and a lot of moving parts, and the school board thought it would be helpful to do some short videos for each school community to explain why the board is doing a citywide boundary review in Oshawa and how it might impact their school communities. Before we talk about any specific scenarios impacting Sir Albert Love and its community, I just want to take a minute to talk a little bit about the process and then talk about why a school board might do a boundary review. The material that is being presented is based on options that the Board of Trustees agreed to have staff take to the community for input. These are not the final recommendations, but really are intended to provide potential options for your input and feedback. The committee, made up of various board staff, school principals, and a school council representative from each school, will review the feedback and then prepare final recommendations. Those recommendations will be brought back to all of Oshawa via virtual meeting on May 4th, 2023. So why does a school board do a school boundary review or an attendance area review? Well, there's a variety of reasons why a board might conduct a review. Right now, we're going to explore some of the main ones. One of the primary reasons is enrollment pressures, and that means when the enrollment at a school is significantly over what that school was built for. And a school board looks at boundary reviews or changing those boundaries as a way to try to alleviate that enrollment. Again, assuming there are schools close by or somewhat close by that can take that additional enrollment. The other reason why a board might consider a boundary review is when a new school opens. If that new school requires a new boundary and it impacts some of the existing schools, again, a boundary review may be necessary to determine what that new school's boundary will look like. Another reason is an enrollment imbalance, similar to the first point about enrollment pressures. A school board may have some schools that are significantly over capacity. They may have some schools that are under capacity, and they may need to just try to better balance or equalize enrollment for those various schools. And then the last one is program. So if a board has, for example, a French immersion program, and they are looking to either expand that program or offer it in a different way or change the boundaries of that program, that's another reason why a school board might do a boundary review. In the case of this review, and like I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, it's a citywide review, fairly complex, a lot of schools involved. And the other thing is that all of these things, all of these reasons about why a school board might do a boundary review are present in some form in the City of Oshawa review. So let's take a look at some of the enrollments. What we're showing on the table here is all the elementary and secondary schools involved in this review. We're showing the column that says OTG is the board's or the school's permanent capacity. So it's bricks and mortar capacity, what size it was built for. We're showing the enrollment by grade for all the schools, all the way from JK to grade 8 on elementary, 9 to 12 on secondary. And then we're showing the total enrollment and the utilization rate of that school, which is simply referring to the enrollment compared to the capacity of that school. And what we see on this table is that it's quite varied. There are schools that are in red that are over capacity, some slightly so, some well over capacity. There's some schools that are operating at capacity, some schools that are operating below capacity. So it varies across the study area. When we're talking about Sir Albert Love School in particular, it was built for a capacity of 291. It currently has about 294 students, so it's pretty much operating at capacity or just a touch over at 101%. On the next slide, what we're looking at is the same thing we just looked at, 2022 October headcount enrollments. But what we've done here is we've divided the enrollments out by regular track English program as well as French immersion program. In the city of Oshawa right now, the board offers French immersion programming at 3 of its elementary schools, St. Christopher, St. Kateri, and St. Thomas. They're all dual track facilities, which means they offer both English programming as well as French immersion programming. Right now, there are about 537 French immersion elementary students, makes up about 11 and a half of the total elementary enrollment in the city of Oshawa. By school at St. Kateri, about 41% of its enrollment is French immersion. At St. Thomas, about 36%, and at St. Christopher, about 29%. What we're looking at now is we want to get an idea of what do these school boundaries look like? How do they look like in relation to each other? Where are the actual schools located? And that's what this map is showing us, is all the various boundaries as well as the various schools across the city of Oshawa, elementary wise. And right in the middle of this map, you see your school, Sir Albert Love, in the purple color highlighted by that red circle. In addition to the main boundary that we're looking at, if you look to the northeast of this boundary, same color, that purple color in this area here, that's also part of Sir Albert Love's boundary. It's what we typically refer to as a satellite boundary because it's not necessarily contiguous to the original boundary. And the next slide looks at the exact same thing, the school boundaries that we just looked at, but these are simply heat maps showing again those utilization rates of each school. Wherever you see sort of orange colors or red colors, those mean that those are schools are significantly have significant enrollment over capacity. Wherever you see more of these green schools colors, those schools are pretty much at capacity, and some of these cooler colors, enrollment is actually below capacity. And this is showing us based on 2021 enrollments, and this is showing us based on projected enrollments in about 10 years. The scenarios considered for part of this review really fall into a few main categories. The first one is school boundary changes. So we're talking about a traditional school boundary change where we look at moving the line to either make the boundary larger or smaller. The second is grade structure changes. So the new approved Monsignor Paul Dwyer Secondary School has been approved as a grade 7 to 12 school. So as part of this review, the board is interested in hearing from the community about possibly which grade 7 and 8 from which schools should go to the new secondary school. And the third main part of this review had to deal with French immersion programming. As we talked about previously, there's currently 3 dual track French immersion schools. So we looked at a diverse set of options all the way from status quo, leaving it as it is, to 1 single track facility for the whole city, multiple single track facilities, combinations of single track and dual track. So really all options were considered. So now we're going to get into how some of those scenarios we just spoke about actually impact Sir Albert Love. So there's a couple of them. The first one we're going to look at is a school boundary change. So really the impetus for this scenario or consideration had to do with surplus enrollment or enrollment over capacity at St. Joseph Catholic School. If we look at the table here, it's currently operating at about 136% utilization, about 443 students compared to what it was built for at 395. So the recommendation or the scenario was taking a portion of St. Joseph's boundary here and sending it south into Sir Albert Love. As part of this recommendation as well, it was taking the satellite area for Sir Albert Love we just spoke about and sending it south to John the 23rd. So what that does is it reduces the utilization like we spoke about at St. Joseph. It increases the utilization at St. John, so it helps balance enrollment between these schools. Goes from 74% up to at capacity at 100%. And Sir Albert Love kind of stays the same. It's operating around 101%, increases slightly to about 106% and kind of remains there throughout the forecast term. And with regard to Sir Albert Love, it's kind of a wash in terms of what we're doing. Almost the same number of students that are coming in from St. Joseph are leaving to go to John the 23rd. So the impact from an overall perspective tends to be quite minimal for Sir Albert Love. The other thing we had considered with regard to Sir Albert Love has to do more with one of the French immersion recommendations. Should the board move to a single track or 2 single track French immersion facilities or something away from the status quo, and St. Christopher would perhaps lose its French immersion program. It would create a little bit of space at St. Christopher to accept some additional students. So in this scenario, it assumes that the option one we just spoke about would be in effect here, and you can see sort of the new boundary changes as a result of that. And then it would also assume that the far western portion of both St. Joseph boundary and Sir Albert Love boundary becomes part of St. Christopher, just to alleviate enrollment a little bit more at these two schools. And then the final scenario that impacted Sir Albert Love has to do more on the secondary side of things. So when we look at some of the enrollments projected at the new Monsignor Paul Dwyer, they are getting a bit high and over capacity of the school. So as part of this review, again, being that the secondary schools were included, was looking at are there any possibilities to reduce some of that enrollment at the new Dwyer? So what was looked at was changing the feeder school alignment. So the feeder schools are the elementary schools that feed into the secondary schools. Right now, so Robert Love feeds into Dwyer. One of the scenarios considered it feeding into Parima to reduce some of the enrollment at Dwyer, and it would reduce enrollment at Dwyer by approximately 100 students once it was fully impacted by this change. In addition, and related to that, another consideration was if that was something that the community found beneficial, would the community also consider sending grades 7 and 8 to Parima? Right now, Parima is a grade 7 to 12 secondary school facility. Its feeder schools are grade JK to 6 for the most part, and as part of this, would Sir Albert Love, if it was directed to feed into Parima, would the 7 and 8s go there as well? So, let's summarize some of the implications for Sir Albert Love. So, the first option we talked about would be that boundary change. Sir Albert Love specifically would gain some students from St. Joseph, lose some of its satellite area students to John the 23rd. Enrollment would be pretty much the same as it is now. The second option would be if that happened, if option one happened, and as well the move out of St. Christopher of the French immersion program happened, then you can reduce enrollment pressure a little bit more at Love and St. Joseph by moving that western portion of the boundary over to St. Christopher. And then the final implication had to do with the secondary school as well as the grade 7 and 8, and that would be a move to from feeding into Dwyer and instead feeding into Parima to reduce enrollment or future enrollments at Dwyer. To finish off tonight's presentation, I just want to talk a little bit about what we've heard so far from the Oshawa community. So we've had a couple of community level meetings. We've had some committee level meetings. We've had a couple of surveys that have gone out to the public, as well as feedback that can be provided to the board through a general email address. And from that feedback, there's a couple of things that are starting to come from it. One thing that we're starting to hear is that there seems to be a preference for single track French immersion programming. There seems to be a preference for two facilities in the city of Oshawa rather than one. When I want specifically with regard to single track French immersion programming, a lot of the feedback wants to see a reduction in this enrollment pressure that we spoke about. There is a concern or a consideration to try as much as we can to keep communities together. And the public also wants us to consider with regard to any changes that might be made, what transportation implications there are, how long students might be on a bus for. When we look at one question that we were asked or that we asked the community early on in the process, what are some of the initial issues you see with some of the existing conditions at your school? You can see that about 50%, a little bit over 50% of the responses are either enrollment pressures or too many portables. So I think there's a clear understanding in the community that there's schools that are operating above capacity and that something needs to be done to deal with some of that enrollment pressure. And that's why the board is undergoing this boundary review. So I appreciate you taking the time to watch this video tonight. I hope you found it informative, but if there are any questions, we will continue to reach out to the community. A lot of information can be found on the board's website and a couple of meetings coming up. Thank you.